As you work with graphics and as you design graphics on your computer, it's important that you understand the different types of graphics that you can work with. Different programs design graphics different ways. Adobe Photoshop and Macromedia Fireworks, for instance, can create what are called bitmap graphics. Macromedia Flash, Adobe Illustrator, and also Macromedia Fireworks can create graphics in what's called a vector format. Now, it's important before we continue that you understand the differences between the two different types of graphics. In this sample file, I'm going to zoom in so you can get a good view of the two different types of graphics. On the right-hand side is a vector graphic, as Flash produces, and on the left-hand side is a bitmap graphic, like Adobe Photoshop produces. Now, bitmap graphics are comprised of small dots of color, all aligned next to each other. These dots are called pixels. Now, when you place all these pixels next to each other, they combine to create a graphic. The advantage of bitmap graphics is that you have ultimate control over every pixel in the image. Such as Adobe Photoshop, I can go in there and manipulate each individual pixel. So with bitmap graphics, you have really good control over every pixel in the image, and therefore you can apply nice effects and filters to that image that you normally can't apply to vector graphics, for instance. So bitmap graphics are great because they give you really good control over the graphic. The downside to bitmap graphics is because every pixel has to keep track of not only its position in the image, but also its color, its value, its transparency. All of that information has to be kept track of. The downside to that is that because it's keeping track of all that information, the file size for a bitmap graphic tends to be quite large. The file size is how much room it takes up on your hard drive. If you have a graphic that has a large file size, it's going to take longer for someone to download over the internet. A vector graphic, on the other hand, is comprised with mathematical points, what are called vector points. And these vector points are positioned along the graphic, and it describes to the vector program, in this case Flash, the shape of it, what color it's filled with, etc. So vector graphics are actually created much differently than bitmap graphics. With vector graphics, you're not keeping track of every single pixel. You're just keeping track of essentially the outline of the graphic. The advantage to that is because you're only keeping track of a few mathematical points to describe an image. It takes up much less file size than a bitmap graphic does. What that means is that it will actually transfer or download over the internet to whoever's looking at it much, much faster than a bitmap graphic traditionally would. So vector graphics are great because they'll download or be sent over the internet really quickly, which is one reason why Flash is so popular, because Flash works in a vector format. So you can design lots of stuff, lots of animation inside of Flash, and it won't take very long to download at all over the internet, as opposed to the same type of animation that was designed as a bitmap graphic instead. So vector graphics are great because they're small in file size and they can be sent quickly over the internet. Another advantage is because they're made of just mathematical points, I can increase or decrease the size of this graphic with no loss in quality. With bitmap graphics, however, the pixels are at a fixed size. So if I go to enlarge the size of a bitmap graphic, it's trying to make up pixels that don't exist, and it makes the graphic look blurry. So with bitmap graphics, while you can downsize them, you can make them smaller. If you try to make them bigger, they're going to get all blurry. Whereas with vector graphics, you don't have that problem. You can make them bigger or smaller, and you're still going to have a nice, crisp quality, as you can see here. I'm zoomed in at 800%, yet my vector graphic looks nice and crisp, and my bitmap graphic looks blurry. So those are the main differences between bitmap graphics and vector graphics. Now, even though Flash, for instance, is a vector editing program, when I create graphics, it does it as a vector, I can still import my bitmap graphics. So I can design a bitmap graphic in another program, bring it into Flash, and I can still animate it and do things to it inside of Flash. So just because Flash is a vector program, don't be fooled into thinking that you can actually import bitmap graphics as well and do things with them here inside of Flash.